Welcome to the Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, go Speed Racer, go to the bargain DVD section of your local Walmart. This is Speed Racer. Welcome to the Blast Zone.
Welcome to the Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Speed Racer, which we'll talk about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how are you doing this week?
Today, I feel like a pretzel. I'm twisted in knots. I'm hot. It's 90 degrees again in LA, and I'm salty about all of it.
Well done. We got to get you some mustard.
Thank you.
And maybe a nice beer cheese.
That'd make me feel better about the whole situation. How are you doing?
90 degrees in LA. We're getting cold in New England.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Temperature dropping. It was low 50s this morning when I woke up. It was beautiful. Threw a robe on for the first time in months. I'm a robe guy now.
Lovely, yeah.
But I couldn't luxuriate in my robe for too long because my lovely wife, Jamie, was running a half marathon this morning. So I rounded up the kids. We went down to meet her at the finish line. She did great.
Awesome.
Finished. She didn't die or poop throughout. That's the thing. People poop running marathons.
No.
They poop themselves, but she didn't.
Oh, that's great.
So very proud of her. Listeners, please clap to yourself quietly.
Congrats, Jamie.
And so that was a nice capper to the week. And now I get to record a podcast with you. What's to complain about?
It's getting better.
It gets better. That's what they say. I don't think about this, but they do say it. Anyway, did you happen to watch anything this week you wanted to enlighten us about? Something cool, maybe something that spans decades and centuries?
Funny that you say that because I watched a movie called 3,000 Years of Longing. It's a brand new flick from director George Miller, who people may know from Mad Max or Fury Road, or they might know him from Happy Feet or Babe, Pig in the City. Interesting career he's had. It's taking a new turn with this. This is not like any of those things, I would say. It's really new, so I don't want to say too much about what goes on in it because I'm a fan of not knowing.
Also, don't say too much about it because we're going to have to do a full episode about it.
Oh, okay, yeah. We'll keep it short. What I will say is that it's super enjoyable. It's kind of a modern take on a classic fairy tale theme. The stars are great. Tilda Swinton is good as always. And so is Idris Elba, who I found especially charming in this one. You know, we had him on The Dark Tower. He was a perfectly serviceable gunslinger, but just not that fun a character. He is really charming in this one. He shows some of his tender side along with his familiar ferocity that we know him for. But yeah, this one's a straight up recommend. I liked it.
Yeah, he was not the problem with The Dark Tower, to be clear. He did a serviceable job with what he was given, but we did not like that movie very much. If you need proof, you can listen to our episode on it.
Yeah.
It's back in the 40s somewhere, I think. Yeah, it's funny. We're doing a little Idris doubleheader today because I also watched a new feature starring Idris Elba, and I liked it less than you liked yours, unfortunately. I saw Beast. He battles a lion while on an excursion in Africa, visiting family. It wasn't embarrassingly bad. It wasn't a complete catastrophe. It just wasn't what I look for in this type of movie. And when I say this type of movie, a family or a person under siege from an animal, it's a pretty popular genre. I often talk about Crawl from, I think, 2018 as one of my favorite movies of recent years.
Oh,
it might have been 2019. But this movie doesn't have enough of a mean streak to work as like a true creature feature. It's trying to be a family drama. And you always need something besides just wild animal chasing people to make it into a real movie. But I don't know, the movie just doesn't go for it in the way that the best types of these movies do. It's a little squeamish, I think, about the violence of getting rid of main characters. It's not willing to go there where you need to make these type of movies really feel dangerous and alive. It just kind of felt like a pulled punch. And
I see.
It didn't fully work for me.
Reminds me a little bit, we were talking about movies in that genre. Ghost in the Darkness was one that had quite a lot of story to go with a good, scary man-eating lion plot.
Yeah, I'd say Ghost in the Darkness is just a better version of this movie. Crawl, obviously Jaws is the original. There's a bunch of these. Lake Placid, Deep Blue Sea, which are super cheesy. The Shallows was a big one from a few years ago. I'll watch any creature attack people who are isolated for some reason. It's just a fun thing, but it didn't hold on. In a movie, I will watch it. I do not mean it's a fun thing in real life. Yeah, but this movie just didn't go all the way. It was like 80% willing to do what it had to do to make it into a really fun, brutal thriller. And it just didn't have the confidence to fully commit to the bit.
Interesting. Yeah, Idris Elba seems to make a lot of movies these days, and they're not 100% success rate, but but at least some of them come out good.
And he's never really bad in them. It's usually not his fault. He's a favorite of both of ours, so we will ride for Idris all day. A little bit of a miss on this one. Again, not a total failure. I'd say it's like a C+. All
right.
But now it's time to talk about Speed Racer. Ian, what did you remember about this movie? Big movie, big budget, big cast, kind of big cast. These people weren't huge stars at the time, really, but the Wachowskis coming off V for Vendetta and the Matrix trilogy, big deal. This was an IP, even if you weren't necessarily a fan of, everybody knew. Like everyone had heard of Speed Racer, even if they didn't watch the anime or read the manga. So what was your familiarity with this movie? Did you see it back then? Did you know about it?
I knew it existed, and that's about it. Despite the fact that I did sometimes watch the original cartoons, they were on TV in real time for me as a kid, and I thought, oh, Speed Racer is something cool. Even though I didn't watch enough of it to really feel like I understood it, I'm like, yeah, that's Speed Racer, and there's Racer X is the cool, spooky, tough guy, and I knew there was a chimp and something called a Spritle that jumped around and made jokes.
It sounds insane based on how you just described it. It kind of is, honestly. Like you weren't inaccurate.
No, it's pretty wild. We'll get into talking of the combination of very serious basic concept about racing and corporations and anti-corruption efforts and just like wild zaniness of the style.
Interesting anti-capitalist, anti-corporation view from a $120 million movie from the Warner Brothers company, but that's neither here nor there. You got to take your shots where you can get them in.
There's a lot of inherent ironies in this thing. But yeah, despite being a fan of The Matrix and being aware of the Wachowskis and thinking they were hip, the marketing for this movie in particular, I guess it didn't appeal to me. I just skipped it.
The marketing of this movie is an interesting thing to discuss because I don't think they knew how to market this movie. There was some marketing aimed purely at kids, and there was some marketing that was kind of like grimdark, or as grimdark as you could cut a trailer made of scenes from this movie to be, trying to be a serious thing. And so I did see this movie, not in theaters, but I saw it pretty soon after it came to Blu-ray or DVD. I can't remember which. I didn't like it. And I think part of the problem was I was a huge fan of The Matrix because I was like a teenage boy when The Matrix came out who was not going to love guns and black leather and this idea that you're the chosen one. So the Matrix trilogy was huge for me. I loved V for Vendetta, but those are all fairly serious and self-serious movies, pretty adult themes, and can be pretty violent and upsetting at times. And then you hear the Wachowskis are making a Speed Racer movie, and the marketing, at least what I saw, probably based on the programming I was seeing it attached to, was like, this is going to be a grittier take on Speed Racer. And then I saw it, and it's not that at all. And I think it was a case of my expectations being out of whack with the finished product. So I never revisited it. And then, of course, I was aware that it was starting to get some newfound cachet as like a cult favorite. People I know and respect are huge fans of this movie. You guys know Haley from That's My Boy, unfortunately, and Malignant Episodes is a huge Speed Racer movie fan. So I was like, it was clearly a bomb. We'll talk about it. It's a pretty big bomb. It's a $100 million club bomb.
Wow.
And when I revisited it now for this, I was like, oh, the only person that was out of whack was myself for not enjoying it for what it was and taking it in and accepting it. I was attaching my own weird expectations to it, but there's so much to enjoy here in this movie. It really is like a kind of a staggering accomplishment that it got made at all.
You talk about expectations. This movie is the fucking Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expected what this movie delivered. So you can't really blame yourself too much. And then you see that a lot in the critics' response to it too. It's really polarized. Some people were like, this is a masterpiece. They're way ahead of their time. And there's a bunch of people who were like, this hurts my head and I can't take it.
It will hurt your head. I promise you, you will be confused and anxious for a little while until you kind of settle into the tempo of this world that they've built. But they really did build a world. This feels like nothing else you've ever seen, I promise.
Yeah, whatever you thought it was going to be, a grittier take on Speed Racer, a pure homage to the anime, a funny family movie. It's all those things, and it's something totally different from all those things, or something pushed way beyond the boundaries of all those things at the same time. So it's a lot to take in. And it's definitely a movie, as I sometimes have that experience on this podcast. I liked it on the first watch, and I liked it even more on the second watch. I warmed up to it because you can catch more of what it's doing and you're ready. You're not knocked off balance quite as hard on the second watch. And there's just a lot of really cool shit.
If you go into it already on the movie's level, I think you're going to be rewarded much more for it. But even if you go into it with no expectations and not really knowing what you're about to witness, you will warm up to it eventually. Especially because, to be clear, this movie starts super strong, which is really important for a movie like this. I think if it didn't have its narrative beats down, it would be a very disorienting experience. But because they've really, well, we'll get it more into it when we go over the actual story. But the first like 20 minutes of this movie is just a masterpiece. It feels like the pilot for a Speed Racer show that would have been awesome. It does so much world building and setup for what I initially kind of dismissed as a kind of silly childlike story. But now I realize there's quite quite a bit going on in this movie. It's just not presented in the way that convoluted plots are these days. Like, it's not Chris Nolan. It's not trying to hide things from you or subvert your expectations, but there are a lot of interpersonal things going on. It's so hard to describe this movie. It kind of defies it, but we're gonna have to try.
Before we move on to the details of this particular movie, did you get a chance to check out the original cartoon at all?
You're gonna be mad at me, but I didn't. Life gets in the way.
Just so then I will be the resident expert. As weak as my background is, I have these vague memories of it from my childhood, and then I reviewed some of it on YouTube, and it has this very signature title sequence. So it's just a cool thing that I wanted to point out. Title sequence, once you see that, you're like, okay, I see a lot of what they're doing visually in this movie. There's the checkerboard patterns, there's backgrounds changing behind foreground elements. We'll talk about all that. There's one really cool thing that's the end of the title sequence. The Mach 5 pulls up, Speed Racer jumps out and freeze frames, kind of swaggering in mid-step. And then as he's frozen, the camera pivots from the front of the car to the side of the car. And I'm like, holy shit, that's bullet time. This is proto bullet time.
Oh, wow.
And it's done with just cheap bargain animation, which is a signature of the show, which they were constantly saving frames and doing tricks to make it cheaper to produce. But they did this one really cool signature move at the very beginning of every show. I'm like, wow, did the Wachowskis actually key off that? And is that something that's stuck in their brains as kids?
It definitely seems like they had a passion for this show, so I wouldn't be surprised if stuff like this influenced their early films.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I know there was a lot of talk about how they would film the show to make it look like they were animating stuff that they weren't. They would just make like long storyboards almost and pan across them to like mimic animation, but it was really just
there's a lot
the camera
of
panning across the drawings.
Yeah, to get more screen time out of fewer drawings, which is cool. And you would definitely see that in the visual style of the movie too, although it just taken to another crazy level.
Yeah, they were clearly well-versed in the anime when they decided to make the movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to hear the story about this movie got made? It's kind of a winding road, you might say.
That sounds great. Tell us how this thing happened.
All right. Speed Racer, or Mach Go 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 in Japan, was created by writer Tatsuo Yoshida as a manga in June 1966 and quickly became a phenomenon, being adapted into an anime television series less than a year later that would help spread Speed Racer fandom to the rest of the world, as it would go into syndication almost immediately. 52 episodes would be produced, and the series would have a long shelf life, remaining popular until the 1990s. As far back as 1992, American film studio Warner Brothers had stated their interest in adapting the series into a film, and in October of 1994, Julianne Temple had been selected to direct, and they started casting. Henry Rollins was offered the role of Racer X, with Johnny Depp being cast as the titular role in June of 1995.
Boo.
Production was slated to begin in October of 1995, with locations in Arizona and California being scouted. It was not meant to be, though, as Depp requested some time off for personal reasons in August of 1995, and Temple would announce his departure from the project that same month, citing concerns about the film's budget. At this point, Depp also abandoned the project.
Smell you later.
The studio considered Gus Van Sant as a potential replacement, but refused to give Van Sant the chance to write the screenplay, and he passed. In December 1997, the studio hired Alfonso Cuarón to direct, but this was short-lived as this iteration of the movie also fell through. The project would languish until September 2000, when Hype Williams, best known for directing music videos but also a film director with 1998's Belly under his belt, was brought on board.
Hey, I have a belly under my belt too. Can I direct a movie?
Screenwriters Christian Gudegast and Paul Schuring were paid $1.2 million to write a script for the film, but they left the project along with Williams due to a lack of progress.
But not a lack of fucking incentive.
Vince Vaughn would resurrect it in 2004, intending to serve as an executive producer and also playing Racer X, but once again he was removed from the film due to a lack of progress. The first real signs of advancement would be in October of 2006, when the Wachowskis were hired to write and direct the film. Having a wealth of experience with visual effects heavy and narratively adventurous films, the Wachowskis seemed like a natural fit, though they were determined to make a family-friendly film, which was a deviation from their previous work. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Shia LaBeouf, and Zac Efron were all considered for the role of Speed Racer, but Emile Hursch eventually won it, and when Keanu Reeves declined the part of Racer X, Matthew Fox picked up the helmet.
Fox, party of Mach 5, your table is ready.
With a $120 million budget, filming took place at Babelsberg Studios in Potsdam, Germany, and the film was shot almost entirely in green screen to allow the Wachowskis to put both the foreground and background in focus to further accentuate the anime look of the movie. Warner Brothers put a hefty push behind the marketing of the film, licensing almost 5,000 products and securing multiple promotional partners like General Mills, McDonald's, and Lego.
Happy Meal? More like Happy happy wheel, because race cars have wheels.
With a release date of May 9th, 2008 set, all the marketing in the world couldn't prepare Warner Brothers for Robert Downey Jr. in a metal suit, as the previous week's release of Iron Man continued to dominate the box office, and Speed Racer would open in third place. Critical reception was mixed, and the movie would only earn $93.9 million at the worldwide box office, putting it into the rare club of films to lose $100 million. The movie has taken on a second life, though, becoming a popular cult classic.
The Curse of the Iron Man. What a bummer for the Wachowskis.
I think it's important for people to kind of remember the landscape of movies in 2008. Iron Man was not a big character for Marvel. He hadn't been for decades. He's kind of like a C-tier character at this point in time. Robert Downey Jr. is a pretty disgraced former movie star who hasn't really been in anything big in a long time. Jon Favreau's directing it. He's not a big marquee director. Nobody expected Iron Man to be the hit it was. I think everyone was not in that mode where they are now, scheduling around Marvel movies, making sure they give themselves a month or 6 weeks outside of any big Marvel releases so their own little movie can flourish. There wasn't any of that going on back then. We weren't prepared for the MCU juggernaut.
No, we weren't. But someone was. Kevin Feige was, because this was their plan. This was movie one of a big old plan. They somehow knew.
I don't know how big the plan was back then, but I think once they saw the receipts from the first Iron Man, they were like, okay, we got to start mapping some shit out. Obviously, quite beneficial for them.
Kind of worked out. Didn't work out so good for Speed Racer. He never got to come back.
No. Emile Hursch might have something to do with that too. But spoiler alert, there is a sequel script floating around. The Wachowskis have written a script. Emile Hursch said in 2018 that it was completed. Would he be like the Racer X character now, though? He's kind of old.
Yeah. What do you do with these long-term sequels?
Hard to say.
Got to pull a Maverick.
Spritle would be the new Speed Racer.
Yeah.
Oh, but Chim Chim. We got to talk about Chim Chim when we get up there, because everything that happens with Chim Chim now I see in a very different light. I'm sure you do as well.
Nope. The movie Nope, if you haven't seen it, folks, it does a lot of fun things.
Was it fun?
Fun if you like being terrified.
We should say less, though. Maybe we should cut some of this so we keep some mystery around Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, what a winding road. I could see Henry Rollins as Racer X, though, honestly.
Yeah, that would work. Matthew Fox obviously can outact Henry Rollins, but there's not that many words you have to say as that character in this movie, so it's not that big a challenge.
I'm a Matthew Fox stan, though, a Jack Shepherd for life, and it became complicated because he had some demons. I don't know what to say. He was accused of like punching a female bus driver, but then that story, like when I was researching it for this podcast, I realized there was a lot more to the story than I realized, and maybe he wasn't such a villain in that situation.
Yeah, there's definitely some dispute about what happened, and I don't know if that means anything, but it doesn't fall into the category of abuse that goes on with a partner or a colleague. This is an incident that happened at a party. I don't know if that changes anything. You have to obviously take all those kind of allegations seriously, but it's very hard to.
And it seemed like it. I don't know if it tanked his career in Hollywood or if he was always kind of a reclusive and super intense guy who kind of picked his projects pretty carefully. So who's to say? But yeah, I was a big fan of the show Lost. So when I saw Matthew Fox in a big movie, I was very excited. He's a super intense actor and probably person. So I see why they picked him for Racer X. But yeah, he doesn't get a lot of lines in this movie.
No, I think he has one big speech where he's got the mask off and he actually does some real acting. But he's really great at the other stuff, which is like overly intense, melodramatic, and yet he's selling it because he's so committed to it.
Yeah, a lot of fun actors in this that I felt were underutilized by Hollywood, like Scott Porter, who plays Rex in the early portions of this movie. He was Jason Street on Friday Night Lights. I promise the rest of this podcast will not just be me naming actors and where I know them from, but I was always like, I had a weird thing with him too. Him and Matthew Fox. I was both like, why aren't these guys in more stuff? They're both good looking, good actors. They've got charisma, they've got presence, and I feel like both their careers kind of floundered. To see them both in this movie doing good stuff was another reason that kind of put me in the right headspace to enjoy it, I think.
Yeah, well, we'll forgive you for show dropping this time because we know those are two big shows for you. Lost and Friday Night Lights, like you can't not mention those.
They're behind only, of course, the holy grail of Justified and shows I talk about on this podcast. And unfortunately, let's get it out of the way now. We don't have a Justified crossover of the week this week.
Well.
I was surprised because this is a pretty big cast and it came out around the same time Justified started. You'd think there'd be some crossover, but no luck.
But we had two last week, so we've got one in the bank. We can coast on that.
Good point. All right. Do you want to walk through the story of this movie? Because there is, like I said, a surprising amount of plot for a childlike film.
Yeah, let's get to telling people what happened. Speed Racer, played by Emile Hurst, grew up in an automotive family, led by his race car building father, Pops, played by John Goodman. As a child, Speed was obsessed with racing and with his older brother, Rex, a talented driver. Later, Rex was apparently killed in a car crash, and Speed grew up to be a promising young driver himself. When Speed breaks Rex's long-standing record time at the local racetrack, he's invited by Royalton Industries to join their racing team. Mr. Royalton himself leads a tour of the team's luxurious facilities for Speed and for his whole gang, including Pops, his mom, played by Susan Sarandon, his girlfriend Trixie, played by Christina Ricci, little brother Spritle, and Spritel's chimpanzee, Chim Chim. When Speed turns down Royalton in favor of staying with the family team, Royalton angrily chews him out. He tells Speed the entire World Racing League is a fix and that he and the other big corporations control every single outcome for their own financial gain.
Quite a lot happening in that first section. And it's interesting. What I mean when I said like the movie isn't trying to trick you or subvert your expectations about the story too much is like when Royalton shows up, we as the audience are like, there's something with this guy. Like, is he going to be a bad guy, like a secret bad guy? But then it takes the movie like 10 minutes to be like, no, he's an overt bad guy. We're not even hiding it anymore. Like every time you think they're going to play a shell game with you and try to keep some information from you, they're just like, no, we're just gonna tell you what's going on. It's very much like how a cartoon would, because they don't have time to have these drawn out mysteries. Really, they just throw everything at you almost immediately, and it worked. It made it feel like narratively focused.
Yeah, it's a very earnest movie. It's very direct, straightforward in the premise of the setup. Like you said, there's one big mystery, which is Racer X's identity, which they keep.
Is it like the movie is so they're talking about the night Rex disappeared, and then they do immediately pan up to Racer X watching, oh, he's chasing the ghost of Rex, but no one knows what happened to him. He died mysteriously. And then it just pans up to Racer X watching Speed Racer race immediately. And you're like, okay, we get it.
Yeah, I guess for adults, it's not really a mystery, but they don't give it away. In fact, they do some misdirecting we'll get to where they actually try
they
to
do, which I thought was kind of a cheap little move that they did. But we can quibble about that later. We should start at the beginning.
Yeah, we talked about the montage. I fell in love with the movie as I realized what was going on, because it starts out, we'll talk more about the visuals because they are disarming at the beginning of the movie, but there's actually a disarming level of storytelling going on. Like you said, it's 15, 20 minutes, a single contiguous sequence that contains multiple flashbacks. It took me 2 watches to figure out what's the actual structure of the whole thing. You think you're watching one thing, Speed Racer's getting ready for a race, he's thinking about his childhood, and then it just keeps going forward.
Speed Racer has to think about his entire life before he races.
Exactly. Tim Meadows is just out of frame in that locker room telling a guy to give him a minute. And it's awesome. I love that, and I can't escape that reference when we have a flashback scene like this. But this is, if anything, it's more ambitious than a walk-hard farce of a flashback sequence. I figured out on the second watch, it's actually everybody gets a turn to step up to the mic. You don't necessarily realize whose flashback it is, but they keep cutting to another member of the family. So Speed gets his flashback that's mostly about his childhood. Then they show Trixie. She gets a flashback that kind of continues Speed's childhood. And then Pops has one, and then Mom has one. But it's kind of subtle. All you know is just like, I'm learning the whole backstory of this damn family, and it's working. Like the fact that they pulled it off amidst an incredibly intense, high-action race sequence. It's amazing. I was like, I love it. I love what they're doing.
And the race sequences, we can't talk about them enough because there's a lot of racing in this movie. Obviously, there kind of needs to be, but it's so electric. Like the racing is just insane.
Yeah.
The amount of action that they cram into these scenes. And it's basically, I don't know if anyone ever played Wipeout for PlayStation, but it reminds me a lot of those games. Okay. It's got like techno music blaring. The way the cars move are more like hovercraft, I would say, which is what Wipeout was.
Okay.
And it's just, it really evoked that memory in me of playing that game as like a kid and just being blown away.
It definitely evokes video games because one of the things that's happening is Speed is chasing the ghost of his brother, and not in a ghost spiritual sense, but in a video game sense where you play a race game and you see the car whose time you're trying to beat in front of you. So that's like straight video game shit. But then I'm like, yeah, the motion of the cars, I was actually thinking they went beyond video game style motion to Hot Wheels, like the cars flip around like little toy cars do. And then they have some characteristics of like old slot cars, if you go back that far, to those things that were anchored to the track with a one single pin under the front half of the car, so they would swing around in weird ways. These guys are like drifting, but it doesn't look like drifting because they just turn sideways and keep driving.
They constantly are like, is it drifting if you're always drifting, or is it just that's how you drive now? Because the course has almost no straightaways, so they kind of need to be constantly in a state of perpetual sideways motion to maintain their speed.
It's a lot. I think you and I both had the same reaction of shrinking back from the screen because it's overwhelming. Just going, wait, am I supposed to make sense of what's happening? These cars are spinning insanely and it's cutting so fast. It's a lot to take in.
I refuse to believe that Dark City had more cuts than this movie, but it actually did.
I still find that hard to believe. I don't want to question you and your quality of your movie research, which is top notch, but this movie seems to have 24 cuts a second, like every frame is a cut to a different thing.
Maybe that's the thing. If everything's a cut, then nothing's a cut. I don't even know what that means. I just said it because it sounded provocative. But yeah, like you said, pulling back from the screen, I definitely get what you mean. I felt my anxiety ticking up watching this movie, but like weirdly not in an unpleasant way. But you immediately have to get your bearings because the movie is trying to throw you off, and it's very good at it. The Wachowskis are super talented visual filmmakers. I don't know if anybody could have made this movie besides them and done it justice like this.
No, it's very interesting to think about. So there's a common reaction to this movie by us, and certainly was reflected in what the critics had to say, is that like, oh, it's so hyperactive. The action is so intense. It's for kids. It's made for a younger generation. I can't take in that much action. Except then you go, wait a minute. Wachowskis weren't young when they made this. I looked them up. They're on the old side of Gen X. So
borderline boomers?
Yeah, they're borderline boomers. And not only that, but watching it, I'm like, this could actually be too much for kids even. You don't need to like flash strobe lights in your kids' eyes. They do have limits, I would think.
I have 2 kids, and most of what they watch is relatively muted in tone and not so hyperactive. There's obviously songs and big visual sequences, but kids can't deal with this for 2 hours and 15 minutes straight, I don't think.
Yeah.
I was tempted to watch it with my son, Jack, but I was like, yeah, I think he'll just be confused and probably like a little frightened.
It would be interesting to follow his course through it. But yeah, I do think what that leaves, the explanation is this is just Wachowskis. Like they are unique people with very unique sensibilities, and this is all them. They're showing you something that you haven't seen before.
I'm putting you on the spot, and this is probably a question that would have needed some time to prepare. But can you think of another director that could have made a Speed Racer movie work?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. My director knowledge is not good enough to say, but no one is doing stuff like this, are they?
No. The only person I was considering was maybe Terry Gilliam, because he's got a weird handle on like twisted kids stories and wild visuals, but I don't think he'd be like the technology aspect of this movie is also super interesting. Like we said, they filmed the backgrounds and actors separately so that they could overlap them and make them both in focus, what is a brilliant idea. You almost need a director or directors in this case who are not only good storytellers, but are just like kind of technical wizards to come up with that. It gives the movie such a distinctive look and really does make it work as a live action cartoon, which is what it was trying to be. And other people have claimed to be live action cartoons before, but I don't think anyone has ever lived up to that promise as much as this movie.
This just exploits it to this other level where it's like, okay, it's one thing to have cutouts, and we heard somebody make a reference to another Blast Zone favorite or unfavorite, Draft Day, which has some actual similarities, right? That's a movie strictly made for boomers, but it does all these scene transitions where characters are cut out and the background of another scene floats underneath one character's head, which this movie does, but then it elevates it to an art form, man. Like it starts out kind of cheesy and you're like, oh, this is just green screen actors on fake looking overly bright backgrounds. But then there's scenes where there's just heads floating left and right, and it's like an intense dialogue between the bad guys in one intense part of the movie. And you're like, oh my God, it's mesmerizing what they're doing with the heads floating back and forth on screen, and it's adding to the drama so much. And it's like, who else could think to do that and pull it off?
And to give credit where it's due, that was J.D. Amato.
Thank you.
Who made that comparison. And Draft Day is not anyone's idea of a visually exciting film, I don't think, or an exciting film in general. Yeah, it is weird how like they took visual cues from this movie in a sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if the director of Draft Day's ever fucking seen this movie. It's entirely possible that they didn't, but this movie definitely did it first. Ahead of its time comes up a lot when people discuss this movie in retrospects, and it definitely rings true.
Except that it's so far ahead of its time that nobody bothered to copy it and make that the thing now. I think it's, oh, we just can't do that. No one can do that. Better not try.
Right. It's too intense. Let's talk about Speed Racer himself. What's your take on Emile Hurst in general as an actor?
I came in without a lot of reference for him, except for the real world stuff where we find out he had this ugly incident of choking a movie executive at a film festival, allegedly. Yeah. I don't know if that's alleged.
No, not allegedly. I think it's for sure a thing that happened.
Okay.
He pled guilty as far as I know.
Okay. So I was like, yeah, I don't like that guy. And then he's quite good as Speed. Speed is kind of a milquetoast character. He's a super earnest kid. He believes in racing and not much else. But he ends up working. I don't know. He has a good face for it, and ended up being happy.
He's got a very like square jaw, which works when the top half of your face is covered by like a racing helmet.
Oh, good point.
It gives him, he's got like a real good profile with the helmet on. I was a big Emile Hurst. I bought Emile Hurst stock back in the day. I remember The Girl Next Door was a movie I enjoyed. Also early Timothy Olyphant role as a villain.
Oh, okay.
Our boy Raylan. And then he was in Into the Wild the year before this, which I think was like a big breakout dramatic role for him. It showed he had adult acting chops because he was not quite a child star when The Girl Next Door blew up, but he was on the young side of adult. So it was interesting to see him mature and stuff. And then, of course, his career's taken a turn after that incident. He is no longer getting these marquee roles. And then maybe Speed Racer had something to do with that too. It's so celebrated now. We're talking about it because it lost a fuckload of money. It's not like it was a roaring success. I also want to point out about the incident that you were referring to where Emile Hurst choked a film executive. It was a female film executive. Not that, it would have been okay if it was a male, but it does add another layer of ugliness to it.
Sure.
And I find this, not that the situation is funny, but he said he strangled and attacked Paramount Pictures executive Danielle Bernfield in Park City, Utah. Park City, Utah. That sounds familiar. What happens there? Well, I'll tell you what happens. The Sundance Film Festival. So it was like an after party for the Sundance Film Festival. Hirsch went up to her and said, "Why do you look so tough?" And then said she was a rich kid who shouldn't be at Sundance, which is one of the funniest sentences I've ever read out of context. Like the mean streets of the Sundance Film Festival, getting down and dirty in fucking Park City, Utah. Where does he get the balls? Are you fucking kidding me?
That is very confused. I'm like, there's got to be some backstory because, how do you come into Sundance and start talking about how you got to be a tough guy?
The first time you have dinner at Sundance, you find the biggest, meanest looking film executive you can, and you punch him right in the face. You have to establish dominance. And I asked you about this. He's from a neighborhood in LA called Palms. What's that neighborhood like? Is it a rough neighborhood or?
It's on the west side and I'm an east sider, so it's like a foreign country to me. I don't go out there that much. There's a great Cuban restaurant there. Other than that, it's the west side. Nothing's too sketchy there.
Just what a strange thing to plant your flag in. Like, you're not tough enough to be at Sundance? You're a rich kid? It's a fucking film festival. It's full of rich kids. I don't understand.
We may never know how that went in his mind.
Yeah, it's one of those mysteries we'll never solve because he was probably drunk. It was like 2 a.m. I'm still confused though. Do they serve alcohol in Utah?
Oh, that's a good question.
I thought there was like weird alcohol laws in Utah.
I bet there's a Robert Redford exception and he had the town of Park City blessed.
Maybe. I would have liked to see JGL as Speed Racer, but I do agree that Hirsch is good. I really can't pick out any part of his performance that doesn't match the tone of the movie. He's kind of perfect. Like you said, his earnestness, he's not playing any part of it with a wink to the audience. He's really just going for it as is. And then Blast's own favorite, Christina Ricci as Trixie. Also a young Ariel Winter as young Trixie from Modern Family.
I didn't recognize her, but I read about it afterwards. She has a fun little sequence in there.
Yeah, she's good. Good child actor. Christina Ricci, great, obviously. We love the Reach on Blast's own. I'm a big Ricci head now because of Yellow Jackets.
Oh, okay. Didn't get into that, but I heard she's made a big comeback with that show.
Yeah, she's great on it. And then she's in the new Wednesday show. I don't think she's playing Wednesday. I think she's got another role on it, but they gave her a role in the new Wednesday Addams series that I don't think has come out yet, but is coming out shortly.
Fun.
And then you got John Goodman and Susan Sarandon as the parents. It's just full of ringers.
Very solid parents. Speed has lined up there. I want to call out Paulie Litt as Spritle, who I thought I would just find annoying because he plays the annoying little brother and he plays the comic relief. And I'm going to step up to bat for Paulie Litt. I loved him.
There we go.
He's a baby Andy Richter. I don't know how they got Andy Richter into this tiny body, but he has the exact same facial expressions and comedic moves of earnest wackiness. And I thought he was great.
Kids in movies is dicey, especially when they have a big role like this. And also when they're he's not annoying in this, but he's like a troublemaker. So when you have a kid that's constantly causing problems for the rest of the cast, you can turn against them really quickly. But no, he strikes just the right balance of being charming and also being a little shit stirrer.
He's fun. He's a good part of the movie.
Yeah, I was just checking up his, see what he's been up to. He hasn't acted since 2017. So it seems like he's out of the industry, but he was great in this movie.
I think I read he moved on to do more producing than acting. So I think he may be still in Hollywood. I just wanted to raise a side topic here as we've just met the whole Racer family and we met Rex and his little brother Speed. And then we saw Speed grow up and his little brother Spritle. Mom and Pop's Racer have a habit of popping out a little boy child every 10 years. Really interesting family planning from these guys.
It's not really discussed. It's part of the original manga, but when they have a female child, they actually give it to the White Walkers like Craster did.
Oh, shit.
When he would have a boy and he would just go out into the woods and offer it up to one of the others. No, it is strange. 3 brothers spanning 30 years. And
it's wild.
Good for them. They're still active in the boudoir at their age. It's encouraging to see. Susan Sarandon in 2008 was still a babe. And John Goodman he's a great actor. Let's leave it at that. Truly a treasure, though. Love John Goodman. Maybe the busiest man in Hollywood when I was looking up his filmography to see what he's been up to since this. He's been up to everything. This guy never fucking stops working.
Let me just make another note when we're talking about all this good casting. Aside from these primary roles, there's actually a bunch of big roles if we go down through the whole cast. But the whole casting is really diverse. And there's this fully international flavor to the world of the movie. And I just thought it's really fun. It's like an unspoken background of that. Obviously, part of it is spoken as that racing is this global phenomenon in this world that they live in. It's the biggest sport in the world. But it's just really neat the way the characters all merge together from all different kinds of backgrounds.
They got a South Korean actor / singer named Rain who plays a big part in this movie, and he's a huge star in South Korea. And I think people look side-eyed at that type of casting nowadays because there was a big run of Chinese actors and actresses being added to big budget movies to try to draw in Chinese audiences for years.
Right.
And I think people got a little cynical about it because it seemed like a pretty blatant cash grab, but that's not the vibe you get from this casting. You just feel like they really wanted to make a global movie that would appeal everywhere. And also, I don't think like people had worked that out yet, that you can just cast Chinese actors in movies and then they'll do better in China.
Make a few extra million on your movie.
Right. Like that was like a thing I think in the mid 2010s became really prevalent. This obviously was 2008. But yeah, I agree. There's a lot of fun casting in this. And I like the fact that all the Royalton people are British.
Yeah.
It's just like sticking to the old stereotype that British people are villains in movies.
Yeah, let's talk about Roger Allam, who plays Mr. Royalton, one of the highlights of the movie.
He was great. I actually loved his entrance when he's got his private plane parked right outside the house, and every time they open the door, they can't hear each other because the plane is still on. It was just like a silly little throwaway thing, but it's so funny. And then he's clearly to the audience a villain, and it takes the characters a little longer to catch on, but not much longer, which the movie's not trying to string you along in any kind of grand mystery as far as Royalton's concerned.
No, but it is really reveling in him in that first scene. Like they spend a lot of time with him, sitting down with them, having breakfast, talking about pancakes. There are parts of this movie that do feel indulgent, and we'll talk about the total runtime by the end. There are things that they could get to quicker, but yeah, they revel in him being, this guy's a little too syrupy sweet for a big corporate fat cat. And then when he does his turn, it's really effective because the actor is just really good.
And speaking of things that are indulgent, not just that scene, but the tour of the Royalton Industries facility is just a super long sequence.
And totally psychedelic. It's like the Willy Wonka Chocolate Factory, but on angel dust. It's like insane with literally what's going on in the background and then the way it's composited together with all these different things like giant fish becoming the wipe from one scene to the next. It's not just the heads and that. There's so much psychedelic shit going on. It's crazy.
And you pointed this out for a movie that was supposed to be family friendly and relatively like child focused. The big threats from the villains are like a lawsuit, and he makes most of his money manipulating the stock market.
Yes.
Which is a funny thing. And clearly the Wachowskis have an agenda here, and one that I tend to be on the side of, so I don't mind it. But I did think it was a funny way to kind of insert their views into this big Hollywood production.
And it does stand out at the end of this first act where we're like, oh, this is really a kid's movie. You're trying to figure out what you're watching. Like the action is so frenetic. There's all this funny, goofy family stuff, and Spritle and Chim Chim are providing the very safe comic relief. And then Royalton unloads on Speed, and he spends a long time detailing his stock manipulation scheme and how the various industrialists got together. I'm like, the kids are losing. They're like tuning out on this.
They don't know what the fuck a stock is.
But to be fair, I do think the Wachowskis knew that, because that intense monologue is intercut with the goofiest thing that Spritle does in the whole movie, which is eat a whole cabinet full of candy and then go on a wild drug-fueled rampage through the Royalton hallways.
I do want to shout out the Royalton private plane, because that plane was fucking balling.
Yeah.
Had a glass bottom on a plane. I want it. I want to spend time on it. I've never been on
special.
a private plane, and if I ever do, I want it to be the Royalton one.
With the candy, too. It definitely needs to have the big thing of candy.
The candy looked great. I got a bit of a sweet tooth, so I was all in on that. I was with Spritle. That's the adventure I want to go on. Not much for racing, but eating candy on a private plane, you got me.
Let's do it.
You ready to walk through the middle section of the movie?
Yeah, let's hear what happens next.
All right. After Speed rejects him, the corporate fat cat Royalton takes out his anger by having Speed knocked out of his next race and hitting Pops with a frivolous lawsuit. Then Speed is approached by an international policeman named Inspector Detector and a mysterious driver named Racer X, played by Matthew Fox. Their plan is to race together to help a driver named Tejo win a rally called the Casa Cristo 5000, after which Tejo has promised to hand over the evidence he's gathered on race fixing. Speed has to defy his dad to join the dangerous race, but Pops comes around, and along with help from Trixie and the family, Speed's team ends up fending off their rivals and winning. But it turns out Tejo just wanted to pump up his family company's stock, and he never fucking stock marketed this movie. And he never provides the evidence that would bust the race fixers. Meanwhile, Racer X seems so familiar, Speed asks him if he's really his long-lost brother Rex, But Racer X says no, he's not.
We talked about that. It's really funny the way that goes down. It's like, oh, you're not him. It's like, no, I'm not. Okay.
And then he looks at the camera and winks. No, not really. But at this point, I was like, wait, I was pretty sure that was him. And then I was like, oh, motherfucker. But I do want to say that it was really unfair of you to make me say the name Inspector Detector and not laugh in the middle of a sentence.
It's impossible. You did just a heroic job. We laughed elsewhere in the synopsis, trying to say Casa Cristo. And,
Casa Cristo 5000. It's a tongue twister.
Yeah.
But just the fact that, again, the stock market is the root of all evil in this universe. I think that's a pretty bulletproof stance to have.
They're committed to that premise that, like, this is all it is. It's a world where racing is the most popular sport and big business dominates it. And it's a bad thing. That's what's ruining everything good in the world.
Man, you'll get no fucking argument out of me. So
it sounded very reasonable.
I'm on board. Sign me up. Where do I get in a race car? I don't know why racing is the solution to these problems, but that's neither here nor there.
It's almost not racing. They call it racing and you're ready to like see things from the real world idea of what auto racing is. But this is some combination of fighting and racing.
It's a demolition derby. Yeah. The Casa Cristo is Mario Kart, essentially. Like when I was watching the Casa Cristo, I was like, yeah, all they need is a fucking turtle shell and banana peel. Like they're doing all these hijinks, setting traps for each other. There's a lot of bumping cars. People fly out of their cars and wrapped in bubbles when they eject. It's very strange, but it's consistently strange, which means it's not strange. It's just on par for the world they've created.
And the villains, the rivals in this section in that rally race, Casa Cristo, which I will try to say, add to the fun of it. They're very thematic and cartoonish. There's these pink ladies. There's this team that's these GI soldiers who have World War II helmets and for some reason eye black under their eyes like they're football players. And then there's the barbarian team who are just the most over the top and ludicrous. It shows them all getting set up. They all get bribed by the race fixers to take out Speed and his friends. But they bribe the barbarians with a big trunk full of animal pelts. Did you catch that?
No, I missed that. That's funny.
Yeah. They give diamonds to the ladies. They give a big suitcase of cash to the GIs. And then they put a big trunk on the table of the barbarians who are just eating themselves sick with beef and sausages. And they're like, oh, it's all fox pelts. And they're thrilled over the moon.
It's a great little detail.
It's so silly.
So fun. We do need to talk about Taejo, though, because Taejo is the aforementioned Rain, the South Korean star that I was describing. But you put this note in there, but I'm going to say it because I agree wholeheartedly that his whole plot line and purpose in this movie is a little foggy. It's a little convoluted, a little confusing.
Yeah. It happens 30 minutes in. We thought we've met all these main players. And then there's like, nope, there's a whole other world going on with Taejo, with Racer X, who we meet for the first time about 30 minutes into the movie.
Inspector Detector shows up. There's different levels of the race fixers. They all report up to maybe Royalton, but there's like a boss and different levels of henchmen. So there's like the characters explode real fast and get much more complicated to keep track of who's coming on screen. And then there's a bunch of staged fight scenes and stuff. The ninjas attack them in the hotel for 15 minutes, which was kind of more than I needed of just random ninjas attacking our heroes. There's a good amount of excess in this movie. And I think we always kind of feel this way about the middle section of a movie, maybe because we just sense the filmmakers trying to table set the climax, but it feels bloated and overlong, like this section of the movie. Because the Casa Cristo 5000 feels like a natural climax for a movie. And then it ends and you're like, there's an hour left of the movie. It's almost deflating in a sense. I like the 3-race model, like 3 acts and it's 3 races. First is the coming out of the hero. He proves that he's a guy to be reckoned with. Then in the middle, he's facing his brother's death and legacy because Casa Cristo is where Rex supposedly, quote unquote, died in a crash. So that's where he breaks from the family. There's some turmoil, but they come right back together and they win it. But just like the plot around Taejo and all the fixers and fighting them all is maybe more than we needed. We could have got through that middle section in a little more streamlined way. The Casa Cristo race itself is super fun. So I'm glad we got it and we got a lot of it. I don't know why in Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, when young Anakin Skywalker's like, no, this is pod racing. I just want to throw a rock at my TV. But in this movie, like all the racers are just like, golly gee, we sure are racing. And I'm like, hell yeah, you are, buddy. You're doing great. I don't know why I embraced the cheese in Speed Racer. It probably has a lot to do with the tone is just so consistent. Especially in this middle race. Like later, the big bad antagonist race driver in the 3rd race is like a straight ahead, serious European older gentleman. He looks like he could be a real race car driver in real life. The characters in this middle race just raided the costume closet and they're wearing the craziest, most outrageous pieces and they're being absolute cartoon characters. Now that you mention it, the final obstacle racer in this movie is a strange choice. He's very sedate, right? I was like, is that Inspector Detector? Is he driving now? And then I was like, no, that's not him. Different guy. Yeah. Let's talk about the 3rd act. You want to go through it? Let's jump on in. Dejected after his Casa Cristo race didn't change anything, Speed gets an unexpected last-minute opportunity to enter the upcoming Grand Prix, the biggest race of the year.
Pops rallies the team to build a new car for the race in just 32 hours. But Royalton puts $1 million bounty on Speed, and now all the other drivers are gunning to take him out. In the end, Speed digs deep and unlocks his unique talents to win the race and at the same time expose his cheating opponents. Royalton goes to jail for his crimes, and Speed and Trixie consummate their relationship with a kiss. Meanwhile, we learn that Racer X really is Rex, disguised with plastic surgery, but he's dedicated his life to fighting corruption, and even in his family's moment of joyous triumph, he's not ready to reveal himself and rejoin them. Kind of a bummer about Rex, right?
Yeah. It ends on a bit of a downer because this is just a textbook structure where after the big victory, Racer X comes out, reveals he's really Rex, and the family's all together. Everyone's happy. But no, he decides to continue on with this facade, which is weird. And obviously, it was probably intended to be a setup for a sequel where maybe Racer X and Speed would face off and then they'd learn the truth, whatever. But it doesn't actually happen, obviously, because this movie lost $100 million. So we're just left with this real somber ending to the movie.
Yeah, I guess if you revealed Racer X's true identity there, you'd pretty much be ending the franchise. So it's like, you got to kind of do it. But it's another one of those things that stands out tonally. Oh, that was kind of a dark moment. And they reclaim it because they do more of the bright celebration after they do that little cutaway to Racer X. But yeah, he's pretty dark. He's like, it's a mistake I have to live with. And you're like, fuck. Because he was such a good dude and he was such a good older brother to Speed in the early scenes. And you're like, man, his family is right there. And they just had the ultimate moment of their lives. And he's got to fucking stay on the sidelines and pretend to be dead. Sucks.
The pretend to be dead part, yeah, that adds an extra dark layer to it.
Yeah, because they're all grieving for the guy, and he's like, I guess I'm in it.
Is that a running thread in the cartoon, if you remember? Is Racer X never revealed to Speed?
I think he is. I think this sort of ongoing suspicion is a thing, just like it is in the movie, in the cartoon. And I think I read that there was some point where he came clean, but that was just something I skimmed over in reading about.
I'm kind of bummed we never got to see that reveal catharsis between the two of them, because their relationship is really well established in the first third of the movie, and you really do understand their closeness and their bond.
Yeah.
And for it to never pay off is kind of like a little bit of a black mark on the movie, I think.
It's harsh. It's like, well, I get it. That's the reality of both the filmmaking aspect of it and the story. But yeah, it hurts. It hurts you right at the end when you're feeling good.
I love the idea that Trixie and Speed have been dating for 10 years at this point, and they've never kissed. More than 10 years?
And they're kind of weird and flirty. In an earlier scene, they go up to Inspiration Point and they're talking about racing. And she's like, I thought you weren't interested in this. And she's wearing a dress, not a revealing dress, but her shoulders are bare. And she's like looking down at herself. And he's like, oh, no, I am interested in that. And he looks down at her body. I'm like, wait a minute, have they been sexual already? And then it's like, no, actually, one day I might kiss you, my girlfriend. And
but not now, because Sprite's in the trunk and he's going to crash our party.
He does.
Was Chim Chim there too, or is it just Spritle?
Chim Chim was there. Spritle said it was Chim Chim's idea to hide in the trunk, so we can't even really blame Spritle.
Fucking Chim Chim. Always getting into trouble. The movie is fine with you understanding that a lot of people die every time there's a race, but also you should probably never kiss somebody.
Yeah.
Which is that could be a commentary on weird American puritanical views that violence is fine, but sex is bad.
It's funny. I do think the themes of anti-capitalism are quite clearly spelled out. The themes around love relationships and violence in sport and life are not as deeply explored. They're kind of just there because that's how these things got to go for this childish version of the world they live in.
You can't have a Speed Racer movie without the races, and we have to understand that these races are dangerous because Rex died in one, supposedly. Why are we only meeting Richard Roundtree in the last 10 minutes of the movie?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, that guy looks familiar. So there's scenes of him early on when they're showing newsreel footage of the old-timey racer and the big classic race that everyone looks up to when things were pure, and then Royalton tries to tell you that they weren't so pure, that even that race was fixed. And you're like, yeah, that driver kind of looks familiar in that old newsreel footage. And then boom, it's Shaft. Richard Roundtree comes back big time in the third act.
Talking about Shaft. Shaft.
Right on.
Damn right. Shaft just pops up out of nowhere.
He brings the movie home. He plays an announcer in this end sequence, a racer who retired and became an announcer for whatever crazy networks are broadcasting the Grand Prix. And he's really the one on Speed's side. He's getting really excited. He actually almost ruins their PG rating. Speed's appearance at the Grand Prix is a surprise. He has his secret golden ticket and he shows up on the day of the race and says, you have to let me race. And then he pops out and everyone's like, who's that? And Richard Roundtree goes, shit. And they bleep it. But I'm like, oh, damn.
But then Speed drops an S-bomb later on that just...
Yeah, was I crazy or did I actually hear that?
Maybe it did. I don't know.
So I made this note. I rewound it twice today when I rewatched it. And there's a middle part of the Grand Prix and Speed is head-to-head, bumping and grinding with the other Hall of Fame driver.
Bumping and grinding? I don't see nothing wrong with that.
My race terminology may be slightly off kilter.
Sure.
They're trading paint. He shoves him off the track and he says, get that weak shit off my track. And I'm like, did he just say that?
You know what? I think I do remember that line, which is weird though. It's so incongruous with the tone of the movie up to that point.
Should that even be legal in a PG movie? Can they say, get that shit off?
You could say shit in a PG movie.
Okay.
I think people do it a lot less since PG-13 became a thing. Like, if you're going to put one swear word in a movie, like, it's usually not going to be shit.
And it's it's in character for the emotion because it's the most heightened climax of the movie, but it's really out of character for speed. So you go like, wait, is he starting to talk dirty now?
I know. Maybe it's showing he's growing up. He's becoming a little more cynical and more intense. But I'm glad you pointed out how absolutely chaotic the end of this race is. I almost glazed over. It's all very entertaining, but I have no idea who's who and what the fuck is going on.
It's so intense and it's deliberate because for a while, if you manage to pin your eyeballs open, you can take it all in. You can see what's happened. Okay, now he's spinning, now he's flipping, and this guy crashed into that guy and they just fell off the track. So like you can follow it. By the end, once he eliminates his main rival and he goes to catch up to the rest of the field and he just has some B-level guys to knock out of the way, they're like, no one cares about these guys. It's just about his race to the finish line. So it cuts back and forth between him and every different person who's watching. There's this huge pantheon of broadcasters from all over the world. And then there's each of his family members that are all watching and screaming in the stands. And it starts cutting so fast that they're like, fuck it, you don't even have to know what he's doing on the track. It just shows 3 frames of a car spinning and then one of a car blowing up. You're like, I don't know what just happened, but it's overwhelming. And it's, if you're cool with it, it's really intense.
Yes, it is super intense. I think your read on it is a good one, that the filmmakers just decided it was besides the point about who's gunning for second or third place, where it's all about speed at this point and everything else is just collateral damage in his journey.
And then it evokes for me 2001 because it goes from flipping cars and lights and flashbulbs to like a spiral that was very much 2001 Climax, the tunnel of lights. And then it turns into this spinning red checkerboard. And you're like, oh, he's at the finish line. But he just had a full-on psychedelic freak-out moment.
He's gone plaid, for any Spaceballs fans out there.
Oh, nice.
Do you remember that line?
No, because
you've seen Spaceballs, right?
I've seen the first 20 minutes of Spaceballs several times. But
God fucking damn it.
Sorry.
Come on, Ian.
I'm trying to close that one up, and I tried to watch it again recently, and something distracted me.
Did you not like it? Or
I liked it okay. I wasn't wild for it, but I'm used to that. I have a good relationship with Mel Brooks and Mel Brooks movies. I mean, like a huge fan of Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles, but there's also his history of the world type stuff that like didn't quite suck me in. So I'm like, I can deal with that because I know what he's doing and his whole vaudeville thing works for me, but I just have to sit down with it. It's a gap in my cultural knowledge.
You really do. There's a lot of things I say that are directly ripped from
yeah.
Spaceballs. I don't know that I could be objective about Spaceballs ever, so I'm glad it did well enough. Did it? Actually, you know what? I think I remember learning that Spaceballs was not such a big hit. Let me see. Spaceballs, because then I could just force you to watch it. Sometimes when I really want you to watch a movie, I could just put it on the schedule.
Put it on the schedule, yeah.
Ooh, it didn't double its budget.
Ooh, we might be headed for the ball zone.
It won Worst Picture at the Stinkers Bad Movie Awards. Go fuck yourself, Stinkers. Yeah, I'm putting Spaceballs on the schedule.
It was controversial among my friends. That's what
Some didn't like it
about it. Yeah.
I mean, I saw it as a kid. It was it's one of the only memories I have of my dad is watching Spaceballs a lot with him.
Oh, wow.
But that's not like a fond thing.
Okay.
And you know what? I haven't seen it in probably like 15 years. I should rewatch it and see if it's still any good.
We've had some interesting experiences with revisiting old childhood favorites. This will be a fun one.
Evolution. We're looking at you. Tastes may vary. I guess that's Speed Racer.
Yeah. After everything we talked about, the movie wraps up with just some really quick, let's get this out of the way, family-friendly, safe ending. They kiss. Spritle does one last funny comic aside, and then they show these headlines that are like, and everyone got what they deserve. Royalton goes to jail. Everyone happy.
That's the movie. And it's got a very visually arresting credit sequence as fitting a film of this tone. And then that's it. And you feel like you've just been boxing against a video game character for 2.5 hours. This movie's 2 hours and 15 minutes long. This movie is probably too long. The Wachowskis were not concerned with reining their ambition in. They were going for it. I'm sure they had Final Cut at this point in their careers because they made the fucking Matrix. And V for Vendetta was also a pretty big hit. So there's a touch of unchecked ambition that probably could have used a pass from a vigilant editor, but the movie's still a blast.
I've been thinking about the length of this movie because it is clear that it's a little overstuffed and you can see scenes where you're like, oh, they didn't have to go so deep into this or that, but it's not trying to be that movie, or you can't say, oh, it should have been a simple movie for families because it's trying to be all these things. And you're like, no, actually, it earned its right to be everything that it's trying to be. So unlike other movies where we're like, just cut it down, just make the genre picture that everyone wants to see easy and don't overload it. This one invented its own genre. So you're like, okay, I guess that's what this movie does. And even though it's long, you're like, oh, they did it.
I can't even think of what would be a double feature with this movie. I can't even think of one. Maybe some kind of Tarkovsky shit, something real slow and ponderous.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, crackling fireplace log. That's what I would want to watch after this, to just
watch the Yule log.
Just put on the old Netflix streaming Yule log and chill out for a while.
Oh, Speed Racer, you beautiful, weird movie. We touched upon the fact that the marketing for this movie was uneven. Speed Racer was not exactly a hot commodity. The cast has great actors, but no real movie stars, I would say. And the reviews were mixed. And of course, Iron Man was a big part of it. It's not really a mystery why the movie failed.
Not really.
Did you have any more in-depth thoughts you wanted to give on that?
No, my thoughts right now are just like a frenetic sequence of spinning cars, screaming fans, and swirling colors. So yeah, nothing to add.
I'd say by the end of this movie, I felt like Malcolm McDowell in Clockwork Orange with his eyeballs taped open, but except I was happy about it.
Yeah.
What if he was watching something that he really enjoyed during that scene? That's how I feel now. I'm mildly brainwashed, a little unsure of how I feel.
Exactly.
I want to get this out of the way now. The Emile Hurst thing definitely impacted his career. Let's look at what he was doing before the movie and what followed his incident in Sundance. So this movie didn't seem to have a huge impact on his career in a negative way. He was still doing quite a bit of work. He followed up Into the Wild with this movie, and then he did Milk. I know he got good reviews for his performance in Milk, the Sean Penn film about Harvey Milk. He did Taking Woodstock, a very strange Ang Lee directed movie about Woodstock starring Demetri Martin and Paul Dano. Somehow I've never seen this movie, but it lost a fuck ton of money. Oh, hell yeah. Throw it on the list.
That sounds wild.
He did Killer Joe, which is that extremely strange Matthew McConaughey, Gina Gershon kind of neo-noir.
Okay.
It has a notorious scene involving a fried chicken drumstick, which I will not elaborate on. I'll let viewers discover it for themselves. I also think Killer Joe is a bomb. Every time I research a movie, it leads to me adding more movies to the list because I'm like, this actor was in this movie. Oh yeah, that movie was a bomb.
It feels like they're mostly bombs. Yeah.
Oh, it was a William Friedkin movie.
Oh.
Our old friend, Billy Friedkin.
Yeah.
Who was our friend from Blue Chips. Not really our friend. He seems like a pretty bad guy, honestly.
Yeah, controversial.
He also directed Jade. William Friedkin, man, he's got a long list of bombs under his belt. But after Killer Joe, he did The Darkest Hour, Savages, which we're actually covering like in about a month. He's got a role in Savages. Lone Survivor, the Peter Berg, Mark Wahlberg movie we talked about. So he was having himself a good little career when he decided to strangle a Paramount Pictures executive. He still acts quite a lot, but in a lot of like direct to streaming, direct to DVD schlock. He was in a Tom Jane action movie I've never heard of, to give you an idea where his career is at now. But weirdly, he did have a big role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as Jay Sebring.
Yeah.
Which was like, maybe that was one of Quentin Tarantino's. He has reclamation projects. He tries to find actors he feels are underutilized and reinvigorate their careers, but it didn't seem to take with Hirsch.
I see. Yeah.
He's also released 2 albums that I have not listened to.
We love singer-songwriter actors on this show.
It was described as like indie alternative rock, which is one of my favorite genres of music. Maybe I'll check it out one time. So this was also for Matthew Fox. This was in the middle of his critically acclaimed performance as Jack Shephard on Lost. Of course, Matthew Fox got his big break on Party of Five. He was the oldest brother of that group. It's a show I watched a little bit of, but I didn't watch all of it. I think I was a little young for it.
Yeah, I was into it. I liked all the people on that show.
Really good cast. Just looking back through it, it was a very talented group of actors.
Yeah.
He's done some movie work. He was in Smokin' Aces. He had a big role in We Are Marshall, which I never actually saw. Obviously about the Marshall plane crash. What was that, in the 80s, 90s? When did that
I don't know.
I assumed you were like there. You were part of the Marshall football program.
I went to a high school called Marshall, but that wasn't us.
So after Speed Racer, he would have a big role. He was the villain in Alex Cross, which was the Tyler Perry trying to break into dramatic films.
Okay.
He was in World War Z, but I guess his role got cut down significantly because he had apparently a pretty big part in it. But that movie is a famous clusterfuck of production woes and whole plot lines and characters were scrapped. So I guess he was still in the movie, but not nearly as a sizable role as he had, which is a bummer for him because that was a big movie, made a lot of money. Probably would have got him some good exposure.
Yeah.
And he was also in the excellent Bone Tomahawk, which is one of my favorite movies I'll never watch again. Like if there was a genre or a subcategory of a really good movie you'll only watch once, that has to be at the top of the list. Did you ever see Bone Tomahawk?
I tried. I got too scared by the 10-minute mark. Got too tense for me. And I'm like, I got to come back. I want to see it because I heard it's cool and it's going to be something that I would like. But stuff like you just said makes me scared.
I'll say it's really one scene. If they would release like a scaredy cat cut of Bone Tomahawk, I'd be into into it, I'd rewatch it because there's one of the most just absolutely brutally violent scenes towards the end of the movie that I'll never watch again.
Okay.
But Craig Zahler is very hit or miss for me, the filmmaker. He tends to do this. He is like relatively kind of standard pulp fare, and then he just crams in a few scenes of like extreme violence, and it's a little bit much for me. Like he's only made 3 movies. Dragged Across Concrete, which was the Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn's Dirty Cops movie, and by far the worst of his filmography. Brawl in Cell Block 99, which was Vince Vaughn as like a tough inmate.
And I like that one.
Good movie.
I dealt with the gruesomeness of it.
Yeah, it's a little easier to stomach in that one. I don't know why. Maybe because it's other convicts. Kind of, there's no innocence in Brawl in Cell Block 99 really that get hurt. Bone Tomahawk, I think, is his best movie, but again, it's just real tough watches, particularly because of one scene. But he's great in it. Matthew Fox is awesome in it. Kurt Russell's great in it. And then he was MIA from 2015 to 2022. Didn't act in anything, as far as I could tell. Didn't do anything. But he is starring in Last Light, which was just released on Peacock in the last few weeks, which looks like a mini series. It didn't get great reviews. I might check it out just to kind of see what he's up to. Maybe not watch the whole thing, but check out an episode or 2 and see if it grabs me.
Yeah.
Christina Ricci, we kind of touched on her already, but she was also in The Matrix Resurrections. So I guess the Wachowskis had a good relationship with her based on this movie. Or at least Lily brought her back. I don't think Alana was involved in The Matrix Resurrections, but Matrix Resurrections, future episode.
Oh, cool. Can't wait.
Also a $100 million club movie.
What a shame.
John Goodman, like I said, he might be the busiest actor in Hollywood. He's currently starring on 4 shows.
That's crazy.
He's in The Conners, The Righteous Gemstone, which he's fucking great in. If you're not watching The Righteous Gemstones, you need to be. And then he does voice work on The Freak Brothers and Monsters at Work while staying active in films. Like, he still does films. It's insane.
That is insane.
Good for him, though. He was in Captive State, which is a movie I really wanted to like, and it just didn't work for me.
Oh, bummer.
Future episode. Susan Sarandon, she's very active politically, but also constantly working. She was in Jolt and Ride the Eagle in 2021. I don't know if you remember, I brought Ride the Eagle as a show and tell one week, a movie I quite enjoyed. She was pretty good in it. And she's in the upcoming Blue Beetle plus Monarch, which is a show that just premiered on Fox that I know nothing about.
She's working.
As far as the Wachowskis, they've had a little bit of an I would say up and down, but it's been more down, honestly, as far as movie work goes. So they haven't made too many movies. Let's look at their career overall. So they started with Bound, which is a big cult favorite, also a future episode. The Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon lesbian romance / noir thriller. Then they made the Matrix trilogy, obviously. The first one, huge hit. Reloaded, huge hit. Revolutions didn't do as well as I originally thought. I thought all 3 of those movies were just cash cows.
Okay.
Revolutions might have barely broke even.
Okay.
Interesting when I was just kind of digging into the financials for the episode. Then they did V for Vendetta, which was a big hit for them critically and commercially. And then they did Speed Racer, huge bomb. Then they made Cloud Atlas, critical success, commercial bomb. And then they made Jupiter Ascending. Critics hated it, audiences ignored it. So that's 3 movies in a row that are losing tons of money for studios.
Yeah.
Then they split up. I don't think there's any acrimony between them, but they're just not working together. So Lily was involved in Showtime series. Oh, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. Lana was the one who directed and co-wrote Matrix Resurrections. But so Lily was involved in Showtime series Work in Progress that I think is done now, but it got pretty good reviews. Matrix Resurrections got pretty good reviews, but was a box office bomb. But also it was part of that releasing on HBO and theaters the same day was causing a lot of movies to struggle at the box office. But Godzilla vs. Kong also debuted on HBO Max same day as theaters and made a ton of money. So it wasn't impossible to have a movie succeed with that model. And Dune as well was a big theatrical hit and also released on HBO Max.
Yeah, I guess people didn't believe that you could actually resurrect the Matrix, but I felt like they did. I kind of liked it. It would be fun to dive into it deeper.
No, I did too. I didn't think it was perfect, obviously, but it had its merits. And I think overall I enjoyed it. It was just fun to be back in that world again for me because the Matrix movies for people of a certain age like myself are super important.
Yeah.
Also, fans of Sense8 will kill me if I don't mention that they also created Sense8. But Lily did leave ahead of season 2. So season 2 was just Lana, but they did the first season together.
I see.
Sense8 has a rabid fan base somewhere.
Ooh.
And that's pretty much Speed Racer. Now, let me get your thoughts right now. Put it all on the line. We're recording this before weekend box office receipts have come in. Is Don't Worry, Darling gonna bomb?
Oh, yeah, it has to, right?
Or is all this press just going to make people interested?
Make people interested in the same way they were about Morbius. Oh, this is something fun to absolutely shred and ridicule online. But no, I'm not going to buy a ticket for it. That's what I think people will say.
I don't think anyone in Morbius had quite the fan base Harry Styles has, though. I wonder if his fans will just show up. Well, and also, I don't think it's as bad as Morbius. I think it's getting pretty mediocre reviews, but no one's calling it like an embarrassment. I think it's competently made, maybe just not as captivating as they hoped.
It could happen with Harry Styles fans, but on on the other side of that argument is this is the movie where they made Harry look bad, right? Those Harry stands are going to be like, fuck this movie. You're trying to talk shit about Harry and make him seem like a villain. Those people might not even want to be associated with the rest of the crew that made this movie.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I agree. I think it is going to end up being a loser. I'm curious to see it. I'm not going to go to the theater to see it, I don't think. But I'm curious what it's all about.
I know we both like Pine and we both like Pew. So like it's a movie that I do want to eventually see, but I don't know anything about it. And it's another one where I'm like, let me just not know anything about it. Let 6 months go by and then pick it up one day and go, oh, I meant to check that out. Give it a fresh look.
I think that's a good approach to it. All right. So let's talk about next week. It's very exciting. It's our favorite time of year.
Yes.
It's the second annual Blastober.
Oh my God. Spooky season is upon us. Can't believe it.
Sir, we're going to have the new artwork for the episodes, the new theme song. Not new, but, different. Same one as last year.
Seasonal.
We love a seasonal theme song.
It's decorative gourd season, motherfuckers. Let's get it on.
And we're going to be kicking it off with a movie I'm pretty excited to talk about because it's a movie we've both already seen.
Yes.
And we both like quite a bit. And it's called Dr. Sleep.
Dr. Sleep. Oh my gosh, it's full of rich Stephen King heritage expanded upon for a new generation.
The book Dr. Sleep is a piece of hot shit.
Oh, really?
Fair.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Sleep fucking sucks as a book, in my humble opinion. But the movie, one of the rare cases where you can put your monocle on and hold your brandy snifter with your pinky out and say, actually, the movie is better than the book.
Wow, that's fun.
A rare treat.
We're going to get our spook on.
We're getting our spook on. So be sure to tune in for that. We've got a really great slate of spooky movies coming up as we do every October. We're not going to give them all away, though.
No.
We'll leave some to the imagination. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod. Get the scoop on upcoming episodes if you don't listen to 1 hour and 11 minutes into the podcast. I understand it happens, but you can always find out what we're working on next week on our Twitter, or just sometimes jokes about movies.
We joke around.
We have fun. You can email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com, and we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.